Okay, folks, fasten your seatbelts because this week we're going out there, way out there. In fact, actually up there. We're going to Alaska with Linda Moulton Howe. She's made an enormous breakthrough. The pyramid that she talked about and theorized about on Dreamland on August 10th is real. She has a stunning new interview. Plus, if you go to the Dreamland show page on unknowncountry.com, you can click through to a Google map, and there, staring up at you, will be the shadow of this object under the ground out in the middle of the Alaskan tundra. What is going on? And in the subscriber section, Linda and I get into the connection between this mysterious object, its possible use as a power generator, and the suppressed discoveries of Nikola Tesla, and something else I discovered. Many of you have heard me talk about the time I seemed to go back in time on a street corner in Manhattan. It happened in March of 1983. I've subsequently discovered that it happened within just a few hundred feet of where Tesla's lab was at the time period in the 1890s to which I suddenly returned. What does it mean? We go down some very, very extraordinary paths in this Dreamland and in the subscriber area. Linda Moulton Howe needs no introduction, but I'm going to do it anyway. She's the editor. She's an Emmy award-winning TV producer, documentary filmmaker, and the reporter and editor for EarthFiles.com, the Internet's most respected edge science website. And today she has a report for us. Well, just get ready to get your socks blown clean off. And with that said, here she is from Albuquerque, Linda Moulton Howe.
Thanks, Whitley. Well, it was on September 3rd, 2012, that I received a long email from yet another son about his father's firsthand knowledge of an underground pyramid approximately 2 hours east of Unalakleet, Alaska, if you were flying by Huey helicopter. And the date that he has is late April or early May 1978. The other father, who worked for Western Electric under the Bell system and AT&T, he was in 59 to 61, so we're going back almost 20 years that the Western Electric man had told his son about working at the base of a pyramid that was west of Mount McKinley and working 700 feet down based on the distance that the elevators took that father down into the ground. Now, 20 years later, in 1978, we're getting another story from another man with a military background to his son about an exposure also to an underground pyramid west of Mount McKinley. And we think that the distance from Mount McKinley is approximately 50 miles west. Now, the son gave me permission to use his full real name, Bruce L. Pearson. Bruce, 55, is Chief Executive Officer for BroadcastVenue.com and does reporting for HD Media Production in Clinton, New Jersey. His father, who he does not want to identify at this point, joined the U.S. Navy right after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in December of 1941, and he served on Patrol Torpedo Boat 492 during World War II. And in fact, Bruce Pearson's father received a February 19th, 1946, typed thank you letter for his war service signed in ink by then Secretary of the Navy James V. Forrestal, and you can see that entire letter at my EarthFiles.com news website in this report, Part 4, about the Dark Pyramid underground in Alaska. Now, Bruce and I have been talking about this for about 2 to 3 weeks. He has sent me more documents on his father and his background, one of which I will be putting up at Earth Files with some of the personal data blocked out, but again, reinforcing this man is real, served in our military, was commended by Forrestal, and that this story is coming from that man to his son, Bruce Pearson. It was later in the mid-1970s that Bruce Pearson's parents applied to teach in Alaska. So his father is out of military duty, has been working on various other kinds of assignments that his son related possibly to his war service, but his father also loved to teach, and he and his wife applied to teach in Alaska and moved to Unalakleet in 1976. 2 years later, in late April or early May 1978, Bruce's father met a U.S. Air Force pilot in Unalakleet who had also had PT boat experience during the war. And they exchanged some war stories, and the U.S. Air Force pilot asked Bruce's father if he would like to just take a ride with him and his co-pilot on, he told them, a classified delivery mission out a couple of hours from Unalakleet and then right back to town. The pilot stressed that they could not even land the helicopter for a rest, and it would be unloaded, very heavy cargo, and they would refuel and leave. And so therefore, he was basically saying to his father, look, we're on a classified mission, but you're a good guy, I'm a good guy, we both have been in the war. Why don't you just take a hop with us and we can tell war stories and then we'll come right back. And Bruce Pearson told me, I thought about this. How could this U.S. Air Force pilot let my dad on that flight if it was that hush-hush? And yet, I think that Alaska has a way of doing things that causes people to have a lot more trust and kinship. And my dad and the pilot had both served on PT boats, so they had kind of a bond in the military service, close quote. Here now is Bruce Pearson relating what his father told him after the late April or early May 1978 U.S. Air Force helicopter trip to an underground pyramid site west of Mount McKinley in Alaska.
My father had related to me where he had been talking to these guys that came in to fuel up on their way out of Unalakleet on some parts delivery mission. I guess they hit it off, and he said, look, you're not scheduled, but I got a slot if you want to take a ride out with us and come on back. He assumed when he told my mom he was going to go on this flight with him that it was out to an early warning dew line installation. But when he got in the chopper, the guy said, no, this isn't dew line. He said, this is some weird installation. And then he said, well, what do you mean weird? He said, well, it's underground. And the co-pilot, he said, look, this is some generating facility or something that's underground. And he said, well, what's it, just a nuclear power plant? And he said, no, it's not nuclear. It's nothing we built. It's thousands of years old. It's cut stone like a pyramid. It's 150 feet below ground, and they can't figure out what the hell it is. So he said, look, this is all off the record. I'm not even supposed to know this, but this is what I was told, that this thing will put out enough power to power the whole North Slope, the whole state of Alaska, and he said this thing could power the entire country of Canada. That's how much juice it puts out, and they don't have a clue where it came from, and it's underground. But we got the duty to bring this thing out. He said, and I really don't have any idea why that fixed-wing aircraft is following us all the way out there. I guess in case we crash, they'll know where to send people to pick up the pieces. So they had 3 aluminum, stainless steel-looking cases. My dad said they were beautiful cases. They were all machined.
What happened?
They flew out in a helicopter, and I believe it was a Huey, but they were escorted by a fixed-wing aircraft that never landed. And my dad said you could see them every once in a while. They're 1,000, 2,000 feet above them, just making S-curves, so they wouldn't run away from the chopper. They flew out about 2 hours east, my dad said, of Unalakleet.
Did your father ever detail exactly where he thought this place was 2 hours east from Unalakleet?
He said it was in the middle of nowhere, but he said they didn't change course throughout the whole flight, and it was, he said, pretty much due east of Unalakleet.
Okay.
When he landed, he was heavy. He said he was so heavy that when he sat down, the skids spread out. He flew enough in chopper, he said he knew the thing was working pretty hard the whole way out, and they were on fumes when they got out there. It took 6 guys to take him off, that's what he said. And I said, well, what did this place look like? He goes, it was the tundra, there was a blockhouse and a fuel dump and like a motor pool shed, a garage for vehicles, and he said they had a snowcat and he could see a couple other vehicles. And then off to the side there was a couple of mine shaft elevators. And believe me, my father came from a coal mining family, so he certainly knew what a mining elevator looked like with the circular pulleys up top and the gantry and all that stuff. So he said there was a couple of these gantries sticking out of the tundra, and they all had elevated guardhouses on them, and they had electrical razor wire fence around them. And they said electrified fencing, do not approach or something. He said, man, there was a lot of firepower around there, and they didn't have 50 calibers on their Jeeps to shoot polar bears.
Right.
You know, they had them trained on us when we landed. The fixed-wing aircraft kept circling overhead, and these guys all had black uniforms with no insignias on. So he said, I know they were military uniforms, but even the pilot said, I don't even know who these guys are with. Probably spooks is what he said, figuring they were CIA or whatever. But here's the creepy part. I said, so did you see cables coming out of the ground or anything? You know, a transformer station or any of that? He goes, no, but he said, we got about 5 miles from the place, and the co-pilot said to me, now listen, things are going to get a little bizarre. We were told that all our instruments are going to go crappy and we have to go VFR. And VFR is visual flight rules instead of instrument. So he said, don't panic. You're going to hear alarms going off maybe and all kinds of stuff, but we're just going to fly VFR. So sure enough, he said, all of a sudden, the major, who was the pilot, said, here we go, boys. My father, he was sitting in the back, and he looked over between the 2 seats, he said, and the entire radar screen went completely green. So all of the trace went off the radar. All of a sudden, a couple red lights, alarms went for, I guess, generator power. An alarm went off. Horns are going. And the co-pilot said, don't worry, everything's under control. They took it off autopilot, and they were flying it manually and had visual contact for the ground. They're only 500 or 1,000 feet up, he said. But all the electronics went haywire. He said he could see the artificial horizon just flip-flopping. And he said the compass was spinning like 50 miles an hour, so there was no compass heading. Everything was bizarre. The lights were out, like they had lost their generators, and they were still flying, but they certainly weren't flying IFR in that aircraft. He must have had some power to it, whether it was running off batteries or whatever, but he said everything went haywire. And they landed. Nobody got out of the aircraft. 6 guys came in to pull these 3 cases off. Nobody said anything. Nobody signed anything. They fueled them up with a tank behind a Jeep, he said, but fueled up with the engines running and re-engaged the rotors, and off they went. And I said, well, Dad, you know, what do you think could happen? He goes, the Japanese didn't kill me in World War II, and the coal mines didn't kill me, so what are they going to do?
Now, this was an official U.S. Air Force helicopter and crew that invited your dad to go on this trip, right?
That is my understanding, yes.
So your father is flying in a U.S. Air Force helicopter for 2 hours, going pretty much straight east of Unalakleet, Alaska, in the spring of 1978. And he gets a warning that before they land, that there is going to be all kinds of radar and other issues with the helicopter.
Oh, absolutely. He said, look, we've been told that whatever the heck they're dealing with here is going to screw up all of the electronics on this aircraft. We're ready for that. We can fly through that. We're not going to remain on radar or any. We've got VFR conditions, so don't panic when you hear everything hitting the fan. It's not like we lost an engine or the rotors are coming off or anything. We're expecting that. They briefed us to be prepared. That will happen. So whatever they were told, they were not at all concerned that they could fly through it.
Doesn't it sound like the crew on this helicopter had done this before?
That's an interesting thought. Either that or they believed whoever briefed them that not to worry about it.
when they landed, they have these 3 machined, very heavy cases in the helicopter.
Yes.
6 men in black uniforms that are unidentified come and they take out these 3 cases.
Yes.
And then the pilot remains on the ground with the engine running while somebody goes to a Jeep, gets fuel from the back, and puts it into the helicopter while it's still running.
Well, it was a trailer. He said it was a trailer behind a Jeep. It wasn't a full tanker, which had a pump on it. And, yeah, they pumped it into the fuel tank while the thing was running. That's not standard procedure, I can tell you that.
And on the ground, they had military guns aimed.
Oh, they all had guns. He said they were armed to the teeth, yes.
They were in front of people who had armaments aimed at them the whole time the refueling was going on, correct?
Yeah, he said there's a guy standing in the back of a Jeep with a .50 caliber mount pointed at the helicopter.
That .50 caliber machine gun could have taken that helicopter down?
Oh, in 2 seconds.
Okay, and above the whole scene was something like a C-130 that was rotating above.
That is correct. The whole time. I said to my dad, so they're standing there with a .50 cal pointed at you? He says, yeah. I even said to the major, whose side are we on here? Who the hell are these guys? He didn't say a word. And then the guys came to unload. He said, I knew I should just keep my mouth shut. I wasn't even supposed to be there.
The clearly identifiable mine shaft elevators at this remote place had razor wire around them in addition to all the people with guns.
Yeah. I said, electrified razor wire? He says, well, I don't think it was to keep polar bears from falling down the hole. I can tell you that. That's what he said. Electrified fence, do not approach.
Did your father ever give you any more details about where he thought this location was in relationship to, say, Mount McKinley or any of the mountains?
Well, you know, it's interesting because he said it couldn't have been that far from Denali. He did say, we went for a long ways. He said, we couldn't have been that far away from McKinley.
Could you repeat what the pilot of that helicopter said to your father about what he and his co-pilot knew was underneath that ground?
He told my dad, quote, this is as super secret a situation as the Manhattan Project was. He said, nobody is supposed to know this place even exists. And, quote, this thing is some kind of power generator, and it's thousands of years old. It's made out of stone like a pyramid. They don't know where it came from, who made it, or how it works. But it could generate enough power to power the whole North Slope, all of Alaska, and probably the whole country of Canada. And he said, we're not even supposed to know what we're delivering. And here's part 2 of this, Linda, as I related in the email. 6 years later, over lunch with the chief engineer of the television studio at Bell Labs in Murray Hill, talking about vacation, and the guy says, oh, yeah, a bunch of guys from the labs in Western got recruited by somebody in the government to go up to the North Slope to look at some power generating station they couldn't figure out.
And if there is a stone pyramid that is maybe twice the size of Cheops underground in Alaska, at least 150 feet down to the vertex and down to 700 feet to the base, and that it has been built thousands of years ago, according to what the pilots had heard, and that it can generate enough energy to power the nation of Canada. What is the relationship between that stone pyramid underground in Alaska and Cheops and all of the pyramids that have been built around this planet, many of which are allegedly underground for reasons unknown, or at least under dirt for reasons unknown? Who built all of these pyramids? And if they were machines for energy, why is it that our government wouldn't allow all of this pyramid energy to be used on this planet?
I think that's the $64,000 question. It's a little hard to believe we have these blips in the development of knowledge of mankind. You go from the Israelites wandering around in the desert and subsistence living to society that can build structures that we can't even emulate today with all our technology, and then we drop back into the dark ages. You know, I don't think that society is nonlinear like that. To me, that on its surface says there's something not right. How can you have the mass structures in the Yucatan and the Mayans, the Aztecs, and then it goes back to barely scratching out a living and having not enough knowledge to feed yourself? That doesn't make sense.
And what you mean is that the very nature of high intelligence and high technology, as it is even seen in Göbekli Tepe in Turkey 12,000 years ago, and the pyramids and the stone circles around the planet, imply that some other intelligence that is not Homo sapien has been working on this planet, terraforming and building these structures for their means, their agendas, completely separate from the evolving track of Homo sapien.
Yes. Why, Linda, is it so impossible and so improbable and so inconceivable that we were not colonized here for the exact same reasons that we are currently discussing colonizing another planet, Mars?
For some reason, for a very long time, the power-greed structure of this planet, which in and of itself might not be entirely human, seems to have had a self-interest in keeping the general evolving human population from knowing the truth. And that is where we are in 2012. Policies of denial are still in place from World War II. And until those policies of denial are officially lifted, scenes, as your father described, occurring 2 hours east of Unalakleet, Alaska, in the mid-1970s, will keep occurring on this planet while people are still told that we are alone in the universe. That is the first huge lie.
You couldn't be more correct, and that's why I came forward. And you know what? I have run into so many pilots that have said to me in the last 25 years that I've been in cockpits and behind the scene where they said, look, you know what? I got 13,000 hours. I flew B-24s in World War II. I'm ready to retire. And I really don't give a flip if you'll believe me or not. I know what I saw. I saw this. And quite frankly, somebody needs to hear this before I take a dirt nap. So sooner or later, the tide will turn because the volume of documented evidence that folks like you have gone out on a limb and fought to bring to the public's attention will turn the tide.
I hope we will turn the tide, Whitley, and I have been very curious about how this huge underground pyramid might have been detected all the way back, possibly to the World War II era or after. And I talked about this with the retired Navy captain who, to this day, has asked to remain anonymous, but has helped immensely over the last several weeks since I returned from Turkey and did the first story about this underground pyramid at the end of June of 2012. And when I said, how do you think our government detected this? Here is something that he has written to me that I would like to share with our Earth Files and Dreamland audience, because I think it goes to the heart of probably the truth of how we came to know about something in Alaska that may have been there for thousands of years. Quote, the Dew Line early warning system that we built in the early 50s took some 8,000 to 10,000 scientists, engineers, and construction workers into the wilderness that had once seen only the occasional hunter, trapper, gold miner, or native Alaskan village, or a family whose primary concern was survival, hunting food, or searching for gold and silver. But in the planning of the White Alice and Dew Line systems, there was one additional interest in the location and construction of the sites picked for a wax facility or Dew Line antenna, and that interest was electromagnetic interference. Anyone who has tried to listen to his or her AM car radio when you drive by a high-voltage power line knows what EMI is, although maybe by a different name. We call it static, radio static. EMI from the high-voltage power lines interferes with radio reception and makes it almost impossible to hear or understand what is being received. This is no different with a complex long-range and at the time sophisticated over-the-horizon communication system like White Alice that we were putting together up in the Alaska area. In fact, due to the nature of how the White Alice system operates, using backscattered signals caused by atmospheric turbulence, which in effect causes radio signals to bounce off the ionosphere and back down to Earth over the horizon to receiving stations hundreds of miles away, it is even more sensitive to electromagnetic interference because the atmosphere has propagation issues. There are sunspot effects from the sun. There are solar flares that produce the northern lights. That selecting the proper location for the antennas would be critical. Is it surprising to think that in planning for the installation of the White Alice system in the mid to late 1950s, which was part of our DEW-line effort to set up an early warning system to protect us from and for us to be able to know what might be coming from the Soviet Union over the North Pole, and taking and recording EMI levels at proposed White Alice sites, that someone might have detected an unknown source of extremely high EMI activity, and yet there would be nothing that could be seen that was causing the problem. Assume that you were part of a scientific team tasked with finding the unknown source of the extremely large EMI signature using a variety of highly technical measurement surveys to try and locate that signal, and finally determine that nothing was there. No structures were on the surface of Alaska. Nothing, at least, on the surface. It is easy, therefore, to think that once the location of the EMI source was located, and with the Cold War tensions that existed between the U.S. and Soviet Union, and that a remote location in the Alaskan wilderness was identified as the location of a large unknown source of EMI, that due to its remote nature in Alaska, it would have seemed possible for a team of maybe Soviet military engineers to be in that country undetected and buried in the ground with some type of EMI generator that could disrupt the White Alice and DEW-line radar and communications, maybe because they thought maybe somebody was trying to do something where they could attack us. And instead, when they went there and they started going underground, they discovered a large stone pyramid, perhaps 4 times the cubic volume of Cheops in Egypt.
Wow, Linda, you know, somebody's got to go up there and take a look at that, and I hope that happens.
Yes, so do I.
Yeah. Unfortunately, folks, it's not going to be us because that would obviously be very expensive to do. Nevertheless, I thank you, Linda, and I want to just talk a little bit more, ask you a couple more questions about this. For example, there's no indication whatsoever. It just must be very, very old. Very old, this pyramid.
Well, the pilot said to Bruce Pearson's father, according to the father, that it was thousands of years old. And I'm assuming that if this was discovered in the 50s, then they would have been using the same carbon testing that Klaus Schmidt over in Turkey has been using to determine that Göbekli Tepe is 12,000 years old. And you can do this by, as you go down in the ground and you find things that are made of carbon, then you can do carbon dating.
And Göbekli Tepe was buried, and this was also buried.
Yeah. And so you're talking about the same science. They find something underground, and they want to know, well, how old is this? And probably something that had been there for thousands of years may have, on just in visual, whatever it is that they were first visually looking at. Remember, the Western Electric father told his son, that I call John Smith, that when he went down the mining shaft elevator, he came out to a plain cement walkway. It was definitely, they had built a structure from the bottom of the 700-foot trip down in the mining elevators, and then this sort of tunnel with a cement floor went out quite a ways. And when he was tasked to go and do his work, he was told he was at the base of this pyramid and knew they were 700 feet down at the base. So there must have been at least several people out there who have had their eyes visually on whatever this structure is underground, because if there were 8,000 to 10,000 scientists and people working on the dew line, and Western Electric was right at the heart of it, with Sandia Labs in Albuquerque, and Bell Labs was the premier Cadillac laboratory institution, not just in the United States. I would say back then it was probably one of the most outstanding in the entire planet, if not the most outstanding. And they would have put a lot of people on this at the highest classified Manhattan Project level. And so there must be many more people out there beyond Bruce Pearson's father and John Smith's Western Electric father who have firsthand knowledge about this, and I hope that there are other people out there willing to share with me information that they might know firsthand from themselves or from a close family member, such as a father, and email me at earthfiles@earthfiles.com. Always remember, a reporter who files news about the Earth. So it is earthfiles@earthfiles.com. And I am going to continue in every way I can to learn more about this situation in Alaska and the whole huge question that it raises. We know that there are pyramids all over this planet, some under dirt, perhaps in Bosnia and China, and in
the Antarctic.
And then there are those that we know above ground, and now the issue is raised. How many large pyramids might be underground in strategic points on this planet that we still have no knowledge about, but maybe our government does?
Linda Moulton Howe, thank you so much for being with us on Dreamland. We're going to continue on in the subscriber section with an exploration of Nikola Tesla, suppressed and hidden means of power transmission and power transmission through the air. After all, Tesla did succeed in doing that in his lab in New York City in the 1890s. After his death, his records were all seized and simply disappeared into the maw of the federal government.
You've been listening to Dreamland. Be sure to tune in again next week. Dreamland is brought to you by UnknownCountry.com and our family of subscribers. Our news editor is Ann Strieber. Our science reporter is Linda Moulton Howe. Our webmaster is Daniel Stiegel. And I'm your Dreamland announcer, Brian Arnold. Thanks for listening. We'll be back next week.